highly correlated with the cost that has to be paid by the federal government, cost of borrowing by other jurisdictions, corporations, consumers, mortgages, they all would be lowered to the benefit of Canada.
In 1974, as a condition of joining at the time this G7, this group of 7, which became the G8, which is now the group of 20, this was following something called the Milton Friedman School of Business in Chicago. And they thought, well, it's better to give the banking industry of countries to the private markets and let it be handled there and go with the ebb and flow. But as a condition of being a part of these groups, nations have to give up the control of issuing themselves their own credit, of loaning to themselves. And because we chose to do this, because we thought being part of this group of 7 or group of 8, now G20, was a good thing for Canada, we stopped using our Bank of Canada to fund our infrastructure. We don't borrow from ourselves anymore. We borrow from the private banking cartel.
The outcome should be clear. On a board that determines what the interest rate would be for North American Amero area, would have to give greater power to the country that represents 70% of the entire economic activity and financial power, the United States, and only, let's say, 15% for Mexico at the moment and 15% for Canada. The most important thing about this kind of a central bank is that the politicians have to stay out of it completely. Central banks should be removed from the control, the clutches of politicians, should be given a constitution which says, thou shalt only be responsible for price stability. Politicians still play a role because they have to appoint the people to the boards which determine the day-to-day policies which in the end are supposed to have the outcome of price stability.
To give up this right to lend to ourselves is absurd, because what has happened? We've gone from an $18 billion deficit to up to a $588 billion deficit, of which about 95% of that is compound interest. And money, we're paying interest to who? Well, there's no person out there who has a Canadian flag, who lives in Canada, who we pay $60 billion in interest, both federally, provincially, and at the municipal levels too. We're paying someone else interest on the money that we can print and produce ourselves and lend it to ourselves to fund our infrastructure, to fund our social programs, to fund our education for our university students who are also being put in a debt trap. But as you give up control of your currency, and William Lyon Mackenzie King said it most poignantly when he said this. He said, you know, the issuance of the credit and currency is the state's most precious resource. And once you give up that control, it matters not who makes the laws of the land, because usury, once in control, will wreak havoc on any nation.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, here we are at the Federal Reserve. As I said once before, this is the very institution that is highly responsible for bankrupting America and essentially enslaving the world under a perpetual debt system. It's by no way federal, and there are certainly no reserves.
What's your full name?
What's that?
What's your full name?
Is there any reason why you need my full name?
I'm just asking what's your name. What's your partner's name?
Well, you can ask him.
Hey, boss. What's your name?
It's essentially the centralization of power into fewer hands. That's what's going on. Canadians, Americans, and Mexicans will lose their sovereignty, their right to govern themselves as an individual nation. And the economies of all three of the nations will be merged into fewer and fewer hands. I can see an obvious, clear problem with that. The moment that power gets diverted into fewer hands, you got to be concerned.
We have a lot of people here still who believe that having a picture of the Queen is a wonderful thing, and that it is a symbol of nationhood. It is a slippery slope of losing the Canadian national identity by having on our day-to-day, every day we're looking at coins and bills, and there we see George Washington. rather than the Queen or another symbol of Canada. And that sort of pervades society and reduces national sovereignty.
It is the merger of the United States, Mexico, and Canada into one super country. It's like NAFTA on steroids, and it's about bringing all three countries together into one country, joining our governments, our currencies, our military. I had the pleasure of interviewing former President of Mexico, Vicente Fox, and he said himself there will be a North American Union.
Can you please talk about how you, as President of Mexico, President Bush, and the Prime Minister of Canada established working groups towards a North American Union?
There is the original document, the original commitment, and there is supposed to be follow-up procedures. There is supposed to be committees to discuss and to advance, but that's not happening.
Will there be a North American Union? Do you believe there will be a North
American Union? I would hope so. I think it would be very convenient for both of us.
When Vicente Fox in the 1990s was a candidate for presidency of Mexico, I was at a conference and I sat next to him at dinner, and on the other side of Fox was Robert Mundell, whom I mentioned already as the father of the European Monetary Union. And we impressed him, obviously, with the idea that there would be great benefits for Mexican economy from this. He had no difficulty accepting it because he was a successful businessman before he became a politician. He was the president of Coca-Cola Mexico. So when he was elected, he went on a courtesy visit to the White House. And the press release at that time said that he raised with President Clinton the idea that we should push forward on a North American monetary union. It was said that he did the same thing when he got to Ottawa and talked to Chrétien. We have had opinion surveys which showed that the idea of a common currency with the Americans and Canadians is totally unacceptable to Mexicans for nationalistic reasons. They want to maintain Mexico as a clear, identifiable nation and culture. And for some reason, word has spread amongst them that this is the first step towards absorption by the Americans.
So you say you've heard about the Amero currency?
Mm-hmm.
Where did you hear about it?
I read in the newspaper 2 months ago. Yes.
Yeah.
For the Amero, like the Mexican people is why it's my peso is. I don't want another currency.
Mm-hmm.
I am Mexican. I like my peso.
Yeah.
I don't need new currency.
Sí, era una moneda que iban a crear, sería bien, ¿no? Para apoyar a la economía de México.
Pues no, lo que había escuchado últimamente que se iba a tratar de estabilizar la economía y se iba a manejar solamente un solo capital, que es los comentarios que dicen para que esto se estabilice y tenga una estabilidad, pero eso lo escuchaba que iba a ser dentro de 5 o 6, hasta creo que dentro de 10 años más, menos que no sé ahorita si anda funcionando eso.
And this whole new world order ideation is a bunch of banking and intellectual elites that basically see the same sort of mentality. Control the economy, control the issuance of currency, you control the nation. And now control the food, you control the people. Let me control the issuance of currency and credit of the nations, and I don't care who you put in power, because they know control the money, you control the nation. And society, we're not aware of this. But this is all part of this whole globalization scheme that's happening right now.
Even to raise those kinds of issuers, to raise the Amero currency issue, is to inflame a lot of the people who are most fearful about integration. So for those reasons, I say leave them aside. We have some preliminary steps before we get to a point where we can seriously entertain that.
The trouble with the monetary union is that there's tremendous symbolic attachment to our currencies. Although, if you step back, you would say certainly the Greek drachma, or the French franc, or the German Deutschmark, or the Spanish peso would be far more delicate and important to those countries, because in some of those countries they've used the same currency for thousands of years, whereas we haven't even existed for 300 years in North America. So if they were ever able to overcome their fear of losing this distinctive cultural item defining their country like Greece for 3,000 years, certainly it shouldn't be that hard for Canadian or Americans or even the Mexicans to contemplate a different currency. I happen to believe that it would be beneficial to our three countries to begin studying this issue seriously, because it is not a simple step to go from a national currency to a unified currency. It is very hard. And the European experience shows that countries have got to find a way to consult on macroeconomic policy, on budgets and deficits and debts, and establish indicators that would reduce the distortion between economies before you even take the first step toward a common currency. I believe the American people, the Canadians, the Mexicans are practical people. You have to make a convincing case that moving towards a unified currency will be demonstrably better for their standard of living than under the current system right now. We should proceed by letting the academics study this for us. Think about it as much as possible. Help us to understand what the hazards and the benefits are before the people calculate whether it's in their benefit or not.
Well, of course, he'll also give you the line that he never ever talked about a North American union, that he's always advocated a North American community. But if you read what he has to say, what he envisages is this North American community would be organized. He would have basically three very powerful institutions that would basically correspond with a judicial and a legislative branch and an executive type branch, which would the executive branch would steer the agenda for the three countries, Canada, the U.S., and Mexico. You would have essentially a North American Parliament to mirror the three separate independent legislative bodies in the three countries, and then you would have a North American court, which would adjudicate on disputes, etc. Well, that sounds an awful lot like a North American Union to me. He can call it a community if he wants it, but now we're just parsing terms. Silly semantics.
It's important to know when you're talking about this subject that nobody here is talking about a political union. They're talking about economic and political arrangements which deepen integration and the relationship, but in which the countries, as in Europe itself, maintain their sovereignty.
We're talking about the virtual destruction of a sovereign nation, three sovereign nations, the end of a constitution. Sovereign nations can be an obstacle to the free flow of money and goods and labor. And if they can erase national boundaries, obviously that would maximize their efficiencies and their profits. But at what cost? I mean, only the nation state is best equipped to safeguard our individual inalienable rights.